All right, guys, it's going to be the end here to chapter 25, so we're going to get through this pretty quick. So in class, we talked about yellow journalism and all that sort of stuff. Besides the yellow journalism, you also had magazines that were being created, so like Harper's and Atlantic Monthly, which are still around today. Also usually had sort of narrower topics for people to get excited about. Famous book here, Looking Backwards, right, talks about this sort of dystopian future and this idea of nationalizing businesses to serve the public interest. It was really created as a response to trusts. As it says right here, Bellamy Club sprang up to discuss mild utopian socialism. Yet again, the movement away from big business as a reaction, okay? So urban life revolutionized the family, or changed the family, right? It says it started the divorce revolution. You'll see the statistics that more in a bit. But it started around this time. About 1 in every 17 marriages got a divorce, where you'll see this change come down to almost 1 in 2. Not in this time period, but over several decades. Urban life, as it says right here, changed work habits and family size. Now you put the majority of the family to work. Not everybody was going to have people that stayed home to watch the kids. People also waited longer to have kids and get married. And families were cut off, as it says right here, from the rest of their larger family, where if they lived out in the rural area, they might have lived in and amongst a larger extended family. As we mentioned in Devil in the White City, women became proponents in the workforce. They moved into the cities to find jobs. Oftentimes these jobs were sort of narrowed culturally depending on their ethnicity. As it says right here, 1 million women joined the workforce in the 1890s. As social codes prescribed what women might work and what jobs they might hold. So like we talked about before, seamstresses, stenographers, secretaries, that kind of thing. But also for African American women or new immigrant women, they tended to do more menial type labor work, more of the seamstress stuff, maids, that kind of thing. As it says, immigrant women clustered into particular industries, like we saw in the picture, right? The Italian women in the sewing circle, native-born women, as we pointed out, with these types of jobs, secretaries, department store clerks, telephone operator. We now saw a movement of feminism towards suffrage, meaning the right to vote, but they would not work, as it says right here, with black women sometimes. Now, these women right here, Elizabeth Stanton, right, really kind of the first woman in the suffrage movement with the Seneca Falls Convention that was last semester at some point, and Susan B. Anthony was jailed for trying to vote in the 1872 election. Susan B. Anthony will be a big proponent of the suffrage movement. Carrie Chapman Catt here will be a reformer in the early 1900s. It says pragmatic reformer. They de-emphasize the argument of equality, and more so that women with their place in the home needed to have a place in society to have their voice heard over basically things that affected the home. So like, education and sanitation and all these things that a woman's voice needed to be on the board for. They felt like that should give the women the right to vote in society, so that those things had more representation, and that since women were sort of around that or involved in a lot of those things with their traditional role, that gave them the right to be involved in society with that, and thus the right to vote for that. So as it says right here, Catt stressed the desirability of giving women the vote to continue their traditional duties. As I said before, those traditional duties in and around the home, that kind of thing. And so in turn, things that dealt with that, they should then have more of a say in. You can see, though, that the movement out west created more equality. So Wyoming is going to be the first place in 1869 to have unrestricted suffrage for women. By 1890, state laws to permit wives to own control of property after marriage also. Ida B. Wells there, we haven't really got to her yet, but she will make a famous book going after lynching. I was hoping there's supposed to be a map here. For some reason it's not, but it shows how out west, most of the western half of the United States had voting rights for women, while the sort of southeastern United States did not, and then they were starting to get it in the Northeast as well. But more so, the idea was that the West was more egalitarian. So the suffrage movement, basically, as I was pointing out before, largely excluded black women. Ida B. Wells inspired black women here to mount nationwide anti-lynching crusade. So there was going to be some organization of women into activist groups. And we start to see the creation of national, basically national African American women's groups like the National Association of Colored Women in 1896. Another sort of pre-progressive movement type thing here was the push for prohibition. Okay, the amount of alcohol being consumed was pretty large at that point. And what happened is this had an effect on the family, and so women spoke out about their husbands drinking. So especially obnoxious were the shutter door corner saloons called the poor man's clubs, right? As I talked about before, there was a large number, basically, of social life revolving around the saloon. Immigrant groups were really anti-prohibition, right? Because it was a little bit more part of their cultural makeup. So the Germans and their beer, the Italians and their wine, that kind of thing. And the National Prohibition Party in 1869 gets going, and they got a little bit of support, but it's not going to be almost till the turn of the century that we get the Prohibition Act to the Constitution. Now, a big proponent of prohibition was the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League. Both of these are going to push for prohibition. Carrie Nation, we'll watch a video on her in class, would go into bars, as it says right here, with her hatchet and smash up the bars. I never heard about this bringing disrepute. It definitely brought attention before. Some people saw it as disrespectful or whatever, but for the most part, it brought. She was kind of crazy, but it also brought an attention to these saloons and how they were, causing violence in the home or problems in the home because of men being alcoholics or whatever. Picture there at Carrie Nation. Them outside some sort of billiard hall saloon. So in 1919, as I pointed out much later, we get the Prohibition Amendment, the 18th Amendment. We'll talk about this more in a couple chapters, but it's short-lived, right? Eventually we get the 21st Amendment, which overturns it. Also, other social groups that came about during this time period, the ASPCA, right, for the protection of animals, and also the American Red Cross by Clara Barton. Yet again, response to the Civil War. Of the many sort of things that are going to come about to entertain people during this time period, you're going to see music being more mainstream. So the Metropolitan Opera House in New York, the types of symphonies and all that sort of stuff that people could go to. Also, you started to have more regional music, more of a black tradition in music, such as the beginnings of jazz, which will be very popular when we get to the 1920s. And now people had more time, yet again, to appreciate these things. The phonograph, created by Edison, right, is going to revolutionize the sitting room or the living room, right, where people used to sit around and play the piano. Now they could listen to records or whatever they listen to on the phonograph, those little cylinders. Also, besides listening to music, you have the City Beautiful movement. Okay, the City Beautiful movement really goes around with zoning and planning, like we talked about in class. You'll see a familiar name here in a second. These guys, basically guys like Daniel Burnham, right, and Frederick Olmsted, those architects from Devil in the White City, were inspired by guys like this French guy here that I don't know how to pronounce his name, who helped design some of the famous, boulevards in Paris. They thought that the United States should have similar type things. I'm going to do this here. Oh, that cuts it off. So, as you can see down here, Olmsted, right, created Central Park, and Boston's Emerald Necklace. Boston's Emerald Necklace is a series of parks that sort of goes through Boston. And basically, these parks were places for everyone, right? That's why it talks about egalitarian values. And the idea was that they would last for generations, and people would come there to rest and relax and kind of enjoy themselves. Also, they would be sort of centerpieces for the cities, right? It would be something your city was built around. Here is a painting of the 1893 Chicago or 1894 Chicago World's Fair. So this is the White City, right? Now, other types of entertainment, right? Vaudeville, which we'll hopefully look at a little bit in class, was a variety show type thing, right? We'll also get the circus, right? P.T. Barnum and the Greatest Show on Earth, Barnum and Bailey's, right? Which sadly, depending on your viewpoint, is going to close here pretty soon. And you also got the Buffalo Bill Wild West show, right? Buffalo Bill would have got the performers in the area, or the not necessarily the area, but in that vein, right, of the Wild West, people that rode and shot and whatever, and would take them on a tour of the United States to places, namely urbanized places, where they could show off their skill set and really make a theatrical show of what it was like to be in the Wild West, right? People at this time, with the frontier closing, really romanticized the ideas of the Wild West. Yet again, if you remember in Devil in the White City, it talked about riding bikes. So this bike here, this two-wheel bike, would have been revolutionary compared to the the big wheel bikes, right? Go much faster on these smaller two-wheel bikes. And so that sort of revolutionized, yet again, people getting around and people enjoying cycling and whatnot. Some sort of map that didn't make it. Other things that came about this time period was the creation of professional sports. So baseball, after the Civil War got going, gets super popular at the turn of the century. Basketball is created by James Naismith there in 1891. As it says right here, it was designed as an active indoor sport that could be played in the winter. Naismith was a Canadian, and he based basketball off of lacrosse, just as a little tidbit there for you. Also, even though it doesn't mention it here, this is around the time period that the Football Association in England created the standardized rules for soccer. And as it moved on here, other sports, as it started here, gladiatorial trend towards spectator sports rather than participative sports. So people, instead of just doing sports for a hobby, also got to the point where they became spectators, fanatics about it, fans, right? And so you start to see the rise of football as well, namely initially college football in 1889, and then eventually professional football down the road in the early 1900s. Always a big, exciting thing was boxing, and boxing will really, or pugilism as it says right here, will really connect people. And one thing about sports in general, as it points out, was that even though the United States was... There's the bell. Even though the United States was divided along ethnic lines or class lines, people could still get together over sports.